Tonight we'll keep it very brief because my throat is still scratchy and itchy, and I was up all night coughing last night, so I didn't sleep too well. There's a hadith, it's narrated in Sahih Bukhari and other books. It's a story, actually, that demonstrates the perseverance of individuals in light of difficulty. There's a good book that I had purchased. One of the nice things is when you're staying home, you start to go through and you're like, man, I forgot about a lot of these books that I had. One of them was a book written by Sheikh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda, the great Syrian scholar, muhaddith, passed away a few years ago. Rahimahullah ta'ala, may Allah have mercy upon him. He is a scholar of this century, or the previous, obviously within the last 100 years. Great scholar, amazing muhaddith, wrote a number of books, around 60 some odd number of books that he left. He was a lecturer, very well known, mashallah. And his sons, and now even his grandsons, are active in the field of da'wah. Some of his grandchildren are here in the West, in Canada, and so forth. His book, this one, he wrote it over the course of 20 years. It's called Examples of Patience of the Scholars of the Muslims. And initially it started out as a small kutayib, small book about like 50 pages. And eventually he kept on adding to it, until now it's like 400 and some odd pages. But the very first incident is an incident that a lot of us should be aware of, and he takes it straight out of Sahih Bukhari, an example of patience and perseverance, and that is during the Sariyah, the expedition of Abu Ubaidah ibn al-Jarrah radiallahu anhu. And the hadith itself is narrated by Jabir, not by Abu Ubaidah. Jabir, of course, because he lived and he was one of the muhaddithin among the companions. He was able to share the story because Abu Ubaidah passed away during the ta'un of Amwas, the plague of Amwas, so he passed away relatively early. Jabir, he says that Abu Ubaidah was sent as in charge of the Sariyah, the expedition. He said there were about 300 people in this. We were supposed to intercept some caravans, etc. Eventually, they never intercepted anything. The caravan never went their way. The path that they took was near the coast. And the Prophet ﷺ gave them some food, but not enough to actually last them the whole journey, because their hope was they were going to intercept one of the caravans for the Quraysh. And like we said, they actually never intercepted. But during the journey, it became so arduous and difficult that Abu Ubaidah had to ration the food to where everybody was getting 1 date a day. They were surviving off of 1 date a day. And he says, Jabir says, we got so hungry that we would eat the date and the seed inside the pit, we would just suck on it all day just to keep, to give your mind that sense of nourishment that it's still going on. Until he says we had nothing. We ran out of even the dates, and so we would find trees, take the leaves off, boil them, and try to eat them just to have something. He says until we got to the coast, and we found on the coast this huge, he says, fish. And he says some of the people called it al-ambar. They gave it a name, which is the name of a whale. They didn't know what to call it because these are desert dwellers. They've never seen a whale before. Nowadays when we see, it's interesting when you think about it, one of the commentators on Sahih al-Bukhari, he had to explain what a whale was to a lot of the audience, the people reading, because a lot of people were questioning what is this animal? And like nowadays, we don't question what a whale is, even though most of us have actually never seen a whale with our own 2 eyes. But because of the internet, TV, cameras, we know the whales, we know their species, we know their lives. You can learn so much about it without ever, going. So there were a lot of people who doubted whether this was true, that there were fish in the sea that were this big. Because Abu Ubaidah tried to measure it. Anyways, they see the whale. They ate from the whale for an entire month. They survived. And he says, Hatta samminna. And he says, many of us got fat. We gained weight eating from this whale. Because they were so malnourished heading up to this, as soon as they got there, there was so much, the blubber from the whale, is available. And he says, we were just scooping it up like this, and the meat itself. And he says they dried it. They were able to dry a lot of the meat from the whale and take back to Medina eventually. So a month, they stayed there. They were doing their mission. Everything was good. And then they took as much as they could with them, and they went back to Medina. But while they were there, they said, we had somebody hold up one of the ribs, and our camel was able to walk under the rib. And we tried to figure out how many people we could fit in the eye hole of the whale, and we fit 13 men in the eye, where the eye was. And stuff, so they're giving you measurements. And like I said, when you read the commentary, a lot of them are like, what, doubting, what is this? What kind of animal? This has to be. And in fact, it's a real, you realize later. And so the commentator was explaining, he's like, we saw this. And even a recent commentator, from the 1910s or 20s, was commenting on the hadith, and he says how he's from Cairo, but he visited Paris, France, and he said that he went to an exhibit to see such a whale. And he was talking about his astonishment and the weight of it and how massive it was and just how mind-blowing seeing a whale. And it's interesting reading these things from people that haven't had interaction with them is interesting. So anyways, the companions took measurements. The moral of the story from Jabir's point of view is that they persevered. They went through a lot of hardship, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them with something that just literally came up on the sea. And what's interesting is that initially, they didn't even know whether it was halal for them to eat the whale. Initially, Abu Ubaidah, radiallahu anhu, he said, hiya mayta. He says, it's a dead animal, we can't eat from it. ثم تراجع عن هذا, الرأي, he changed his mind. He realized, قد اضطررنا إليه. There's a darura, there's a necessity, and we are out in the sake of Allah, and we have a good intention. The Prophet ﷺ sent us. This has to be, and he saw the signs in front of him. But initially, he was abstaining. He didn't want to eat from it. Of course, we know that it's not only halal for them, obviously, so even if it was haram, like let's say it was a dead animal that's not allowed for them, they're allowed to eat from it because of the darura, because of the necessity. But because they took some of the meat, and they went back to Medina, and they told the story to the Prophet ﷺ, and the Prophet ﷺ said, what? Do you guys have some? And he said, yes. He says, give me some. And he ate, sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And there's no darura there, which shows you that it's completely halal, it's not a problem, you can eat from it. Right? And this is why he says, أُحِلَّ لَنَا مَيْتَتَانِ وَأُحِلَّ لَنَا دَمَانِ. Right? There's two dead things that we can eat from that are not a problem, and there's two bloods that we can eat. Right? And one of them is fish. So you can eat from it. It doesn't have to be, because there's no slaughtering for the fish. Right? I went fishing with a brother. There's an old Palestinian brother back in Utah. And every time he would get a fish out, he would say Bismillah and then hit it with a hammer. I said, what are you doing? He said, I'm making sure that it's halal. And I said, La la ya akhi, you can leave it, it can die. That's fine. You don't have to kill it. He said, Sheikh, what are you saying? You have to slaughter. And I said, there's no slaughter for the fish. So we ended up, I thought I was going to learn from him how to fish, but I had to teach him the rulings on how to just let it, it's okay, it can die, It's not a problem. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has facilitated for it that the fish doesn't suffer typically from that type of thing. Anyways, their perseverance shows that they went through that hardship, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala rewarded them. And not only this, but such a huge reward that it's unimaginable for a lot of people. And such is the life of the believer, that a lot of times we'll go through hardships. In the middle of them, we think, where is the relief going to come from? And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send you a whale from a place that you never anticipated before. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us all to endure when we need to, and that He grants us afiyah, ya Rabbil Alameen, and that He rewards us all both in this life and the next, inshaAllah ta'ala. Does anybody have any questions, comments, concerns? نعم ميتة البحر والجراد. He says the sea, right? So anything that dies from the sea, and al-jarad, which is the locust, right? Which is something that hopefully, inshallah, we won't have to ever eat. But that technically is halal, and there are some, and I've met some people who actually would eat it, and so forth. I'll take your word for it, brother. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you. So those are the two mayta. And with daman, al-kabid wa al-tuhal. So al-tuhal or al-kabid. Kabid is the liver, and al-tuhal is the spleen, yes. You can eat those, inshallah ta'ala. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.